Welcome to Utica County. I am your host, Josh Whitaker, a lawyer with the law firm of Whitaker Hamer. And today I am joined by
Taylor Scruggs-Smith
and Cassandra Nicholas.
And if you're watching our video today, you're probably got a purchase transaction coming up with our law firm, because the subject of our video podcast today is 3 things that you want to know and be ready for the day of closing. And so, not necessarily in the order of importance, but the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was bringing 2 forms of ID. Usually a driver's license, a valid, non-expired driver's license is probably going to be enough. But we always have folks bring the passport, bring the social security card, bring something else, because some lenders will require 2 forms of identification. Not always. Driver's license is good most of the time. But please make sure your driver's license is not expired. I'm the number one guy who would let that happen and not notice at all. But if your driver's license has expired, it's technically not good identification for a notary. And you're going to be signing a lot of documents that have to be notarized. So 2 good forms of ID, valid, in-date ID. That's number 1, I think. Taylor, what do you think number 2 would be?
Number 2 would be about keys. We get a lot of pushback sometimes at the table about keys. So the big thing is knowing that the standard procedure when it comes to giving you your keys to the home is that we don't give out keys until it's on record. If the keys are left with us by the seller and they have told us nothing, that's the standard operating procedure. If you're expecting to get your keys at the table, it's better to have your agents talk about it and the keys never be left with us. Because sometimes the sellers come to closing without their agent when they're signing their docs, and if nobody tells us that we can release keys early, we can't do it. There are bar rules against it, and we have to hold them till they're on record.
Yeah, it's important. So the default in North Carolina is when let's say you're coming to close with us at 9 o'clock in the morning to sign your documents, you give us your money, you've signed your last document, you still don't get your keys. It's not finished. The closing is not over. In North Carolina, we're what's called a race state, so the property is not legally yours until we get everything funded with your lender and we record your deed at the courthouse. And that process can take as little as 30 minutes or as long as the rest of the day, depending on a bunch of factors that you won't have control over. We don't always have control over. But the big thing here is keys at the closing table, not a super common occurrence in North Carolina. Now, there are exceptions, like you said, Taylor. The parties, the buyer and the seller, or the real estate agents can all talk and agree and say, hey, we know it's not going to get recorded till after lunch, but we want the buyers to go ahead and be able to move in. We're going to release keys at closing. But that's something that has to be talked about, negotiated, and communicated to us. And not all sellers, for valid reasons, are comfortable releasing keys before that deed has been recorded, because that your seller, until that deed gets recorded, is still liable if the house burns down, you damage the house, they're still technically legally liable. So keys are a big issue. We have a lot of people, not as much as we used to, but we have a lot of people who show up to closing and they're in their moving truck. They got stuff being delivered to the house immediately after closing, and that's always going to be a bad conversation because that's not always how it works out. And so we try to give you that information in videos like this. It's also in our engagement letter, and I know a lot of real estate agents know that that's how it is in North Carolina and kind of prepare folks.
Now, add on to that, don't schedule movers for the day of closing because you never know what could happen.
Yeah, or at least with some, even if you, sometimes you don't have a choice, but you definitely want to try to close as early as you can in the day and have movers as late in the day as possible.
Right.
But definitely, if it is possible, avoiding doing it the same day. But I know not everybody has that luxury. So that is the number 2 thing we see that, kind of is a misunderstanding of how closings work. But there are others.
A third item that's a big topic of concern on closing day is making sure that we have all of the funds we need for the closing to actually happen and for us to actually get recorded. So there are closing costs, and typically those are not all paid before closing day. you'll find out your closing costs from your lender, and those can still be in flux until the day of closing. So you might have an estimated number of what your closing costs will be, but won't have your final number until close to closing day or on closing day.
Right.
So it is important that that money, if it's over $2,000, is wired to our office ahead of time. If at all possible, at least a day ahead of time. So if you only have an estimate of your closing costs from your lender, you can wire more than the amount, and that ensures that we have what we need to go through with the closing, and then we can cut you a check back for that difference. And
Yeah.
that heads off a lot of those issues.
Yeah, I think that trips a lot of people up. So this is one of the most important transaction in a normal person's life is buying a home and getting moved into that home. And so it's kind of a nerve rattling experience to start out with. And the part that makes it more nerve rattling is you may not get a lot of the information you would like to have until late in the process. So you might not have a final number from your lender until the day of sometimes, hopefully a couple of days before, but the day of. But it's very important, and every bank's different. Some banks will allow you to wire things the same day really easily. Some banks will want your wire in a couple of days before it has to go out. So if you need to wire money to our firm for closing, you definitely need to start on that earlier than later. And lenders can usually, even though they don't have the final number, like you said, they'll have an estimate. And sitting that in will help, because we will probably allow you a personal check to cover the difference if it's under $2,000. So getting most of the money there is always pretty helpful. But I would say those are the three biggest issues we see on the day of closing: not having ID, not having your money, or what was our other one?
Keys.
Expecting keys at closing. So if you have that knowledge in hand, your closing day will probably go a lot more smoother. At least we hope it will.
So if you do need to schedule a closing or want to find out more, you can go to our website at wh.lawyer or call our office at 919-772-7000.